The auction barn reeked of hay and heartbreak, its wooden bleachers packed with weathered faces bidding on lives with casual indifference. 17-year-old Cressida Wainwright pressed herself against the back wall, her fingers twisted in the hem of her oversized sweater as numbers flew from the auctioneer's mouth like bullets. She shouldn't have come here. Crowds made her skin crawl, and watching animals sold like furniture made her stomach churn. But her grandmother Ophelia had insisted someone from the family attend the Hartwell estate auction, even if it was just to show respect for old neighbors. The bay mare in the ring snorted and pranced, her sleek coat gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Sold to bidder 47. The gavel's crack made Cressida flinch. One by one, the horses disappeared through the exit gate, led away, by strangers who saw only dollar signs in their liquid eyes. She'd counted 17 so far, each departure carving another hollow space in her chest. Then they brought him in. The stallion moved with the careful, measured steps of the sightless, his massive head held high despite the cataracts that clouded both eyes like winter frost. His coat was the color of charcoal mixed with starlight, not quite black, not quite gray, and bore the scars of a long life lived hard. The auctioneer's voice took on a different tone, hurried and dismissive. "Lot 43, 12-year-old. Appaloosa Cross, blind in both eyes. Bidding starts at $50. The crowd shifted restlessly. 50 became 40, then 30, then 20. Cressida watched in horror as the majestic creature stood alone in the ring, unwanted and unvalued. Her throat constricted. Nobody was bidding. Nobody cared. $10, do I hear 10? The auctioneer's voice carried defeat. Before conscious thought could stop her, Cressida's trembling hand shot up. "Here," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the barn's cacophony. She tried again, louder. "Here." The auctioneer squinted in her direction. $10 to the young lady in the back. Do I hear 15? Silence stretched like a held breath. The stallion's ears swiveled toward her voice with laser precision, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air. For one impossible moment, Cressida felt the weight of his sightless gaze settling on her face, as if he could see straight through to her soul. "Sold to the young lady for $10. The gavel fell with finality, and Cressida's knees nearly buckled. What had she done? She owned a horse now, a blind horse she had nowhere to keep and no money to feed. Her grandmother would have 17 different kinds of heart failure, but as the gate swung open and a weathered handler approached the stallion with a lead. Rope, something extraordinary happened. The horse stepped backward, away from the approaching man, and turned his massive head directly toward Cressida. He whinnied, not the sharp call of distress she'd been hearing all day, but something softer, questioning, almost hopeful. "Come on, boy," the handler muttered, reaching for the halter. But the stallion had already made his choice. With the careful dignity of the blind navigating by instinct and trust, he began walking across the ring toward the back wall, toward Cressida. The crowd murmured in confusion as 1,200 pounds of horse moved with absolute certainty through the chaos, following an invisible thread that connected two lost souls who'd found each other in the most unlikely place. Cressida stepped forward on shaking legs, her hand extended. The moment her fingertips touched his velvet muzzle, she felt it. The click of recognition, the sudden rightness of a puzzle piece sliding home. His warm breath ghosted across her palm as he lowered his great head, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that everything in her quiet, unremarkable life had been leading to this moment. She'd bought herself a horse. But somehow, she suspected he'd chosen her first. The paperwork took an eternity. Cressida's hands shook as she signed her name on documents she barely understood, acutely aware of curious stares from other buyers who couldn't fathom why anyone would purchase a blind horse. The auction house required proof of transport and a destination address, neither of which she possessed, until a gruff voice interrupted her panic. "Need a trailer, miss?" The man introducing himself as Vernon Caulfield looked like he'd stepped from a Western movie. Weathered leather chaps, silver belt buckle, and kind eyes nested in crow's feet earned from squinting into too many sunsets. He explained that he hauled horses for a living and had noticed her predicament. "That's a fine animal you bought." Shame about his eyes, but there's more than one way to see the world. While Vernon hitched his trailer, Cressida approached her new horse with trembling fingers. He stood quietly in the holding pen, seemingly unbothered by the chaos around him. The moment she spoke his temporary name, "Hello, beautiful boy," his ears pricked forward with laser focus. When she opened the gate, he moved toward her voice with complete trust, allowing her to slip a halter over his head as if they'd performed this dance 1,000 times. Loading proved surprisingly simple. Where other horses might have balked at, the unfamiliar trailer. He followed her guidance with absolute faith, his hooves finding the ramp with careful precision. Vernon whistled low. "Never seen anything like it. That horse knows you, girl. Question is, how long have you two been acquainted?" "About an hour," Cressida admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The drive to her grandmother's farm stretched 43 miles through rolling Kentucky countryside. Cressida rode in Vernon's cab, stealing glances at the trailer's side mirrors, watching the silhouette of her impulsive purchase swaying gently with the truck's motion. What would she tell Ophelia? Her grandmother had raised her since she was 7, after Cressida's parents died in a car accident, and had grown accustomed to her granddaughter's quiet, predictable nature. This level of spontaneity would shock them both. Vernon filled the silence with stories of horses he'd known, champions and cast-offs, each with their own personality and purpose. Animals got souls just like people, he mused, navigating a sharp curve. Sometimes they find their person in the strangest ways. Heard of a dog once, walked 300 miles to get back to a family that never technically owned him. Love, don't follow logic. Sunset painted the sky in watercolor streaks when they finally turned down the familiar gravel drive leading to Moonrise Farm. The white farmhouse sat surrounded by rolling pastures bordered with weathered fencing, and Cressida's heart clenched with simultaneous relief and terror. Home had always been her sanctuary, but bringing a 1,200-pound responsibility into that sanctuary changed everything. Ophelia emerged from the front porch before Vernon had fully stopped, her silver hair gleaming in the dying light, and her expression cycling through confusion, concern, and resignation in rapid succession. At 74, she'd weathered enough of life's surprises to recognize the signs of a granddaughter who'd done something irreversible. "Cressida Fay Wainwright," she called, using the full name that always preceded serious conversations. "What exactly is in that trailer?" The unloading process drew neighbors from 3 adjacent farms. Word traveled fast in rural communities, and the sight of Vernon's professional horse trailer parked at Moonrise Farm had generated considerable curiosity. Cressida felt the weight of multiple gazes as she lowered the trailer ramp and stepped inside. The stallion stood quietly, his head raised alertly toward the unfamiliar sounds and scents of his new environment. When Cressida's fingers found his halter, he nickered softly, the sound of greeting, recognition, homecoming. He followed her down the ramp with the confidence of the sighted, pausing only when his hooves touched grass to lift his muzzle and sample the evening air. "Well, I'll be damned," whispered Elwood Rafferty from the neighboring farm. "He's following her like she's got sugar cubes in her pocket." But Cressida felt the deeper truth in the stallion's behavior. This wasn't about food or habit or training. This was about connection, the kind that transcended sight, sound, or logic. As she led him toward the empty pasture behind the barn, she realized she was no longer the timid girl who'd awakened that morning. She was someone who'd taken a leap of faith and discovered that sometimes the ground rose up to meet you in the most beautiful ways. The stallion would need a name. Proper. Veterinary care and months of patience as they learned each other's language. But standing in the gathering dusk with her hand on his neck and his breath warm against her shoulder, Cressida felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Dawn arrived with the soft nicker that would become Cressida's new alarm clock. She'd barely slept, partly from excitement and partly from the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Through her bedroom window, she could see the stallion standing beneath the ancient oak tree in the center of his pasture, his head raised toward the farmhouse as if he'd been waiting for her to wake. Ophelia was already in the kitchen, mixing biscuit dough with the methodical precision of 7 decades' practice. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, but her grandmother's expression remained carefully neutral, a sure sign of an impending conversation Cressida wasn't prepared for. "His name is Aurelius," Cressida announced, pulling on her boots, by the back door. The name had come to her in the pre-dawn darkness, somehow fitting for a horse with such dignified bearing despite his circumstances. "Aurelius," Ophelia repeated, testing the syllables. "Roman emperor, known for his wisdom and philosophical nature." She paused in her mixing. "Fitting, I suppose, for a horse that's already teaching you lessons you didn't know you needed to. Learn." The first lesson came immediately. Aurelius had spent the night exploring his new territory through sound, scent, and the careful mapping that blind creatures perform instinctively. When Cressida approached the pasture gate, he turned toward her footsteps with perfect accuracy, covering the 30 yards between them in a straight line that spoke of absolute spatial awareness. Dr. Imogen Westfall arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, her veterinary truck kicking up clouds of dust as she navigated the farm's winding drive. Cressida had known Dr. Westfall her entire life. The woman had delivered half the foals in 3 counties and possessed the rare combination of scientific knowledge and intuitive understanding that made her legendary among horse people. "So, this is the auction purchase I've been hearing about," Dr. Westfall said, climbing from her truck with medical bag in hand. "Vernon Caulfield called me last night, said he'd never seen anything like the connection between you two. The examination revealed a horse in surprisingly good health despite his obvious neglect." Aurelius stood perfectly still as Dr. Westfall checked his teeth, listened to his heart, and examined the clouded eyes that had made him worthless in the auction ring. His hooves needed trimming, his coat required proper nutrition to regain. Its luster and several old injuries had healed improperly, but nothing indicated serious medical concerns. "The blindness is complete," Dr. Westfall confirmed, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "Cataracts in both eyes, likely from an injury or infection that went untreated. But see how his ears move? He's mapping everything through sound, and watch his nostrils. He's reading the world through scent like we read books." As if to demonstrate the point, Aurelius suddenly lifted his head and looked toward the farm's entrance road. 30 seconds later, Cressida heard the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle. The horse had detected the sound long before human ears could process it, his other senses compensating for his lost sight with remarkable efficiency. The visitor turned out to be Rowena Kellerman, owner of the largest boarding stable in the county, and a woman whose opinion carried considerable weight in the local horse community. She'd come, she explained, to see the miracle horse everyone was talking about, the blind stallion who'd chosen his owner instead of the other way around. "I'll be honest, Cressida," Rowena said, her tone carefully diplomatic. "When I heard what you'd done, my first thought was that you'd made a terrible mistake. A blind horse is a liability, not a pet. But watching him now—" She paused, studying Aurelius as he grazed peacefully nearby, his ears constantly monitoring their conversation. "There's something different about this one, something special." The afternoon brought an unexpected test. A thunderstorm rolled across the valley with the sudden violence of summer weather, sending most horses racing for shelter. But Aurelius simply stood beneath his oak tree, seemingly unbothered by the lightning that split the sky or the thunder that followed like cannon fire. When Cressida ran to the pasture to lead him to the barn, she found him calm and alert, as if storms were old friends rather than threats. He trusts the world differently than sighted horses, Dr. Westfall observed, watching from the barn doorway, as Cressida and Aurelius waited out the storm together. Most horses rely primarily on sight to assess danger. When that sense is gone, they either become fearful of everything or they develop a deeper trust in their other senses and instincts. This one has chosen trust. That evening, as Cressida sat on the pasture fence watching Aurelius explore his new domain, she realized Dr. Westfall's observation applied to more than just horses. For 17 years, she'd relied on invisibility as her primary defense against a world that seemed too big, too loud, too overwhelming. But something about Aurelius's calm acceptance of his limitations was teaching her that trust might be a better strategy than fear. He approached the fence where she sat, resting his massive head against her shoulder with a contentment that spoke of decisions made and futures accepted. In the gathering dusk, with her fingers threading through his coarse mane, Cressida felt the first stirrings of a confidence she'd never known she possessed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning to care for a horse with special needs, dealing with the financial reality of her impulsive purchase, and navigating the complex emotions of loving something so completely dependent on her judgment. But tonight, sitting in comfortable silence with a horse who'd chosen her for reasons neither of them fully understood, she felt rich beyond measure. 3 weeks into their partnership, Cressida had developed a routine that would have been unrecognizable to her former self. She woke before dawn, spent an hour with Aurelius before school, raced home each afternoon to muck his stall and check his water, and ended every day sitting on the pasture fence while he grazed nearby. Her grades hadn't suffered. If anything, the responsibility had sharpened her focus, but her social invisibility had begun to crack. "You're different," observed Marlowe Kingston, sliding into the cafeteria seat across from Cressida with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. Marlowe was everything Cressida wasn't. Outgoing, popular, seemingly fearless, but her interest appeared genuine rather than mocking. "Not bad different, just more present, I guess." Cressida nearly choked on her sandwich. In 17 years, Marlowe had never addressed her directly, despite sharing multiple classes since kindergarten. "I don't know what you mean." "Come on. 3 weeks ago, you barely spoke above a whisper. Yesterday in English class, you disagreed with Mrs. Carmichael about the symbolism in the old man and the sea. That was legendary." Marlowe leaned forward conspiratorially. "Plus, everyone's talking about your horse, the blind one that supposedly follows you around like a dog." The attention made Cressida's skin crawl, but something had changed in how she processed discomfort. Instead of shrinking away, she found herself straightening slightly. "His name is Aurelius. And he doesn't follow me like a dog. He follows me like a partner." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Moonrise Farm. Jefferson Crawford had been training horses for 40 years, turning problem animals into champions and building a reputation that extended far beyond Kentucky's borders. His presence in their modest barn felt like finding a Stradivarius violin at a garage sale, impressive and slightly intimidating. "Heard interesting stories about your stallion," he said without preamble, his weathered hands gentle as he examined Aurelius's conformation. "Mind if I see him move?" What followed was unlike anything Cressida had attempted before. Following Jefferson's quiet instructions, she led Aurelius through a series of exercises designed to showcase his natural movement and temperament. Despite his blindness, the stallion moved with grace and power, his steps sure and his attention focused entirely on Cressida's voice and body language. "Remarkable," Jefferson murmured after 20 minutes of observation. "He's reading you like sheet music. Every shift in your posture, every change in your breathing, he's processing it, all and adjusting accordingly. That's not training, girl. That's partnership at the highest level." The praise should have been thrilling, but it came with complications. Jefferson explained that Aurelius's breeding and natural ability made him valuable despite his blindness, particularly for specialized therapeutic work or as a breeding stallion. Several facilities had already expressed interest in purchasing him, offering sums that would solve every financial concern Cressida's impulsive purchase had created. "I'm not suggesting you sell him," Jefferson clarified, noting her stricken expression. "I'm saying you need to understand what you have here. This isn't just a pet project anymore. This is a horse with the potential to do important work, and that brings responsibilities you might not have considered." That evening, as Cressida groomed Aurelius in the barn's amber light, she wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Was she being selfish by keeping him when he might serve a greater purpose elsewhere? Did love give her the right to limit his potential? And how could she make decisions about his future when she was still figuring out her own? Aurelius seemed to sense her turmoil. As she worked the brush through his coat, he turned his head to rest his muzzle against her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that had become their private language. In that moment, she realized that Jefferson had missed something crucial in his assessment. Yes, Aurelius could probably work with other people, serve other purposes, contribute to various programs, but the connection they'd forged wasn't transferable or replaceable. It was theirs alone. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. The caller identified herself as Paloma Suarez from the Lighthouse Foundation, a non-profit organization that provided equine therapy services to children with disabilities. They'd heard about Aurelius through Jefferson Crawford and wanted to explore the possibility of incorporating him into their program. "We wouldn't want to purchase him," Paloma explained during their meeting later that week. "We're interested in a partnership. You and Aurelius would work together with our clients under professional supervision. It would allow him to use his natural gifts while keeping you together." The proposal was everything Cressida hadn't dared to hope for, a way to honor Aurelius's potential without sacrificing their bond. But it also represented a level of public exposure that terrified her former self. Working with disabled children, being responsible for their safety and progress, becoming the kind of person others relied upon instead of overlooked. It was the opposite of everything she'd spent 17 years perfecting. Standing in Aurelius's pasture that evening, watching him navigate his territory with the confidence of perfect familiarity, Cressida realized that growth was rarely comfortable. 3 weeks ago, she'd been afraid of her own shadow. Now she was considering a future where she'd help other people overcome their fears. The girl who'd bought a blind horse on impulse was still there, but she was no longer defined by timidity. Aurelius approached the fence where she stood, his steps deliberate and sure. As she ran her fingers through his forelock, she made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Some opportunities came disguised as challenges, and some partnerships were meant to serve purposes larger than themselves. Tomorrow, she would call the Lighthouse Foundation and say yes. The Lighthouse Foundation occupied a sprawling campus 30 miles from Moonrise Farm, its buildings designed with wheelchair accessibility and its pastures dotted with specially trained therapy. Horses. Cressida's first visit left her simultaneously inspired and overwhelmed. This was a place where miracles happened daily, where children who'd been told they'd never walk again learned to balance on horseback, where autism and cerebral palsy became challenges to overcome rather than limitations to accept. Paloma Suarez proved to be a perfect match for the Foundation's mission, bilingual, endlessly patient, and possessing an intuitive understanding of how horses could unlock human potential. She explained the program during their tour, describing how different horses served different therapeutic purposes. Some provided gentle motion for children with physical disabilities. Others offered emotional support for trauma survivors. Few specialized in working with individuals on the autism spectrum, their calm presence helping reduce anxiety and improve communication. "Aurelius would be unique in our program," Paloma said. pausing beside a pasture where a paint mare worked with a young boy who hadn't spoken since his parents' divorce. A blind horse who's learned to trust completely could teach our clients things about resilience and adaptation that sighted horses simply can't, but it would require intensive training for both of you. The training began the following week. 3 days after school and full Saturdays, Cressida found herself immersed in a world she'd never imagined, learning about different disabilities, studying horse behavior and psychology, practicing communication techniques that would help her guide both human and equine students through challenging exercises. Aurelius adapted to the new environment with characteristic grace. The therapy arena was larger than anything he'd encountered, but he mapped its dimensions within hours, locating mounting blocks, obstacles, and exit gates with the precision of a surveyor. More importantly, he seemed to understand the gravity of his new role, approaching therapy sessions with a calm attentiveness that amazed even experienced staff members. Their first client was 8-year-old Cordelia Hartwell, a girl born with spina bifida who'd been confined to a wheelchair since birth. Her parents brought her to the foundation with cautious hope. Doctors had suggested that equine therapy might improve her core strength and balance, though they emphasized that dramatic improvements were unlikely. Cordelia took one look at Aurelius and announced, "He can't see me." "That's right," Cressida replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "He can't see you, but he can hear you, smell you, and feel your presence. He knows you're special just like he is." The first session focused simply on getting comfortable with each other. Cordelia sat in her wheelchair beside Aurelius as he stood perfectly still, allowing her to explore his face with curious fingers. When she touched the clouded eyes that had made him worthless at auction, her expression grew thoughtful. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "No," Cressida assured her. "He's learned to see the world differently, just like you've learned to move through the world differently than other kids." Something clicked in that moment, a recognition between two beings who understood adaptation and resilience. When they finally lifted Cordelia onto Aurelius's back for the last 5 minutes of the session, the horse's response was immediate and profound. He lowered his head slightly, adjusted his stance for perfect balance, and began moving with steps so smooth they seemed choreographed. "He knows," Paloma whispered to Cressida as they watched Cordelia's face transform with wonder. "He understands exactly what she needs." Word of their partnership spread quickly through the foundation and beyond. Other therapy programs requested visits to observe their techniques. Veterinary students came to study how a blind horse compensated for lost sight. Most surprisingly, parents began specifically requesting Aurelius for their children, drawn by stories of the horse who'd overcome his own challenges to help others overcome theirs. The work was demanding in ways Cressida hadn't anticipated. Each client brought unique needs and challenges, requiring her to adapt her communication style and approach constantly. She worked with children who couldn't speak, teenagers struggling with depression, adults recovering from traumatic brain injuries. Every session demanded complete presence and attention, leaving no room for the self-consciousness that had defined her for 17 years. 6 months into the program, Cressida realized she no longer recognized the girl who'd hidden. In the back of auction barns, she gave presentations to medical professionals, trained new volunteers, and handled crises with competence that surprised everyone, including herself. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was fundamental, as if purchasing Aurelius had activated dormant aspects of her personality. "You've found your calling," Ophelia observed one evening, watching Cressida prepare for another day at the foundation. "I've never seen you so confident, so purposeful. That horse didn't just change his life when he found you, he changed yours too." The comment proved prophetic in ways neither of them expected. 2 days later, Dr. Westphal called with news that would alter everything once again. The State University's veterinary school had offered Cressida a full scholarship, specifically citing her work with Aurelius and special needs horses as evidence of her potential for groundbreaking research in equine therapy. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Westphal explained. "They're essentially creating a program around you and Aurelius. You'd study veterinary medicine with a focus on therapeutic applications, and he'd be part of the research. You could literally help write the book on equine-assisted therapy for disabled clients." Standing in Aurelius's stall that night, brushing his coat while he dozed peacefully, Cressida marveled at the chain of events that had brought them here. A timid girl's impulsive decision at a livestock auction had become a partnership that was reshaping both their futures and touching dozens of other lives in the process. The shy teenager who'd been afraid to speak in class was gone, replaced by someone who advocated for horses and humans with equal passion. And it had all started with a single touch. Her fingers against the velvet muzzle of a blind horse who'd somehow seen her more clearly than she'd ever seen herself. 5 years later, Dr. Cressida Wainwright stood at the podium of the International Equine Therapy Conference, looking out at an audience of veterinarians, therapists, and researchers from around the world. At 22, she was the youngest keynote speaker in the conference's history, but her groundbreaking research on vision-impaired horses in therapeutic settings had revolutionized the field. Behind her, a large screen displayed images from the Aurelius Foundation, the nonprofit organization she'd established to train and place therapy horses with disabilities. What had begun with one blind stallion and a timid girl had grown into a network of programs spanning 12 states, helping hundreds of clients while providing homes for horses previously considered unusable. The traditional model of equine therapy focuses on perfect horses helping imperfect humans, she began, her voice carrying the confidence earned through years of meaningful work. But our research has shown that horses with their own challenges often provide more profound therapeutic benefits. They understand struggle in ways that perfect animals cannot. In the audience, Paloma Suarez smiled with mentor's pride. Beside her sat Jefferson Crawford, now the Foundation's head trainer, and Dr. Westphal, whose early encouragement had helped launch Cressida's veterinary career. Most precious of all was Ophelia, now 79 and still sharp as a tack, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of watching her granddaughter exceed every dream they dared to harbor. The presentation included video footage of Aurelius working with various clients over the years. Now 17, he'd become something of a legend in therapeutic circles, the blind horse whose gentle wisdom had helped hundreds of children and adults overcome their own limitations. His partnership with Cordelia Hartwell had become a case study taught in medical schools, documenting how their weekly sessions had resulted in significant improvements to her core strength and balance. The connection between horse and human transcends physical limitations, Cressida continued, advancing to a slide showing Aurelius with his latest client, a young veteran dealing with PTSD. When we allow vulnerability to meet vulnerability, when we pair beings who understand struggle with others facing their own battles, something magical happens. Healing occurs on both sides. After the presentation, Cressida fielded questions from researchers eager to replicate her methods. The demand for disabled therapy horses now exceeded supply, a complete reversal from the days when such animals were considered worthless. Auction houses that once gave away blind or lame horses now contacted the Foundation directly, knowing these animals might have second careers as healers and teachers. The drive back to Kentucky took her through familiar countryside, past the auction barn where everything had begun. The facility had changed hands twice since that pivotal day, but Cressida still felt a shiver of recognition as she passed the weathered building where a timid girl had raised her hand and changed 2 lives forever. Moonrise Farm appeared unchanged, its white fences and rolling pastures as welcoming as ever. Aurelius grazed in his favorite spot beneath the ancient oak, his head lifting at the sound of her car despite his inability to see it. At 17, he moved more slowly than in his prime, but his presence remained commanding, his dignity undiminished by age or circumstance. "Hello, beautiful boy," she called, using the same greeting she'd whispered at their first meeting. He approached the fence with the sure steps of complete familiarity, resting his great head against her shoulder in their private gesture of connection. That evening, as they'd done countless times before, Cressida sat on the pasture fence while Aurelius grazed nearby, but tonight felt different, weighted with the significance of full circles and completed journeys. Tomorrow, she would begin her new position as director of the university's Therapeutic Equine Research Center, the culmination of a career path that had started with $10 and a leap of faith. "We did it," she whispered, her fingers threading through his coarse mane. "Neither of us knew what we were signing up for that day, but we did it." As if in response, Aurelius lifted his head and nickered softly, the same sound of greeting and recognition he'd made 5 years ago when he'd chosen her from across a crowded auction ring. In that moment, Cressida understood that some connections transcend sight, sound, or logic. Some partnerships are written in the stars, waiting for the right moment and the right courage to manifest in the physical world. The timid girl who'd been afraid of her own shadow was gone, replaced by a woman who helped others find their courage. The unwanted blind horse had become a legend, his legacy living in every disabled animal now serving as a therapy partner instead of being discarded. Together, they'd proven that the most profound transformations often begin with the simplest acts of compassion: a touch, a choice, a willingness to see potential where others saw only problems. As stars emerged in the darkening sky above moonrise, "Farm!" Cressida felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. She'd found her calling in the most unexpected place, and in doing so, had helped dozens of others find theirs. The girl and the horse who'd rescued each other at a livestock auction had gone on to rescue many more, proving that sometimes the most broken beings have the most to offer the world. Their story had come full circle, but their impact would ripple forward for generations, a testament to the transformative power of unlikely partnerships and the courage to reach out when everything seems lost.